Hi there and welcome to today's vlog. It's so good to have you with me, and I'm back in my office. Yes, the workmen are still working out there on the building next door. You may hear the occasional bang or crash, but never mind about that. Yesterday I had the privilege of taking the funeral service of a lovely lady called Trish, or Pat as she was known to some. She was a lifelong Donny Rovers supporter. We got on very well. We talked often about footy and other things. Even though I'm a Hull City supporter, she was delighted when I became chaplain to the Rovers when I was here before I moved down to Leicester. So I was asked by the family if I'd take the service because I knew her pretty well, and it was a privilege to be able to do so. And some of her friends shared some of their memories, and a couple of the things that came across were, first of all, her real caring nature. She really cared for people, and also a willingness and readiness to listen. And it seems to me that gift of listening is something that's much missed at times in our society today. Do we take time to listen to people? You might have noticed me straightening my collar out because I've got in trouble before from Sue for having a scruffy collar, but never mind about that. I came across a couple of days ago a picture frame with some pictures that I put in there many years ago now from one of our trips to the Holy Land. We've been several times. I've led groups there, and I would encourage you, if you've never been, when if circumstances allow and you're able, I would really encourage you to go. It's great to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. So I thought I'd show you today a few of those pictures. And the first one is this. This is some of the caves where what's called the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, apparently by a shepherd lad looking after the sheep or the goats, and he threw a stone and it hit something. He went to investigate, and he found all these clay pots with scrolls that had been kept in good condition because of the dry nature of the climate. And these were taken and looked at, and they were scrolls going back centuries and centuries. And I think just about every book in our Old Testament, there were at least some of that book in among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it really added authenticity to the accuracy of our scriptures, or the Jewish scriptures, that we have many of those in our Old Testament. So that was a really important find. As you know, many of the disciples were fishermen. And if you go to Israel today, you probably go on the Sea of Galilee, as it's known, and one of the crew will dress up as a first century fisherman and show you how it was done. This is one of them throwing the net out into the water. Sadly, at that time, I don't think he caught much. But there are several gospel stories related to the Sea of Galilee. For example, the storm that blew up, the disciples were fearful. They woke Jesus up, said, "Don't you care, Lord?" He calmed the storm and said, "You have little faith. Why didn't you trust?" Some of the disciples, as I've said, were fishermen, and Jesus said, "From now on, you're going to fish not for fish, but for people." A reminder of our task to spread the gospel, the good news of Jesus. There are lots of churches in the Holy Land that have been built over sites that represent particular episodes in the gospel or stories. This is called the Church of the Beatitudes. It's built on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Beautiful place, beautiful church, beautiful views from there. And it's a reminder of the teaching that Jesus gave, what we call the Sermon of the Mount, on the Mount, part of which is the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, etc. Really key teaching of Jesus about the kingdom and of God's way is really, really, really well worth reading again. Another church, this time on the Mount of Olives, is called Dominusflevit. The Lord wept. Remember that time when Jesus is nearing the time when he's going to be arrested, and he sits or stands and looks over Jerusalem, and he begins to weep, and he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I longed to draw you to myself, but you would not come, you would not believe." And I am sure that God still weeps over the state of our world today, those who have turned their backs on him, those who claim to be his and yet don't live it out. You know, when we, as followers of Jesus, do things that hurt others and set a bad example, a bad witness, then that causes pain in the heart of God. In fact, that church, Dominusflevit church, that's the window from the church, but the church is shaped a bit like a tear to remind ourselves when Jesus wept over Jerusalem. This is another church. This is the Church of All Nations. This is again on the Mount of Olives. It's right next to the Garden of Gethsemane, and you can go and see very old olive trees in the garden. This is where Jesus prayed before he was arrested. Remember, he said, "Lord, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Can we say that honestly to God? Not my will, but yours be done. This is a lovely, again, on the Sea of Galilee. This is, if you can guess what that statue represents. It's a time when Jesus meets Peter, and Peter's denied Jesus, let him down in a big way. But Jesus 3 times asked Peter, "Do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, Lord." And Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." In the words, he's recommissioning Peter. And Peter became the head of the early church. From big failure to big position of leadership, he was forgiven. And some have suggested that Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Because it was 3 times that Peter denied him. So Peter is renewed and recommissioned. Reminder that whatever we do, whatever big mistakes we make, we can be forgiven and we can be recommissioned for God's work. One of my favourite places in Jerusalem is the Garden Tomb. In around 1882/3, somebody called Major General Charles Gordon was in Jerusalem, and from what is now the Garden Tomb, he looked out and saw the shape in the rocks opposite what he felt looked like a skull. I don't know if you can see that there, a bit of the skull shape there. And he said, well, it says in the scriptures that Jesus was crucified at the place of the skulls, and maybe this is where Jesus was crucified and buried. And in the Garden Tomb, there is a very old tomb. The garden itself is quite a lovely garden. You can walk around. There's a tomb there that some have believed that is the place where Jesus was buried. It's probably not, but it's a lovely place. If you want to go and pray and meditate on what Jesus has done, that is, for me, the best place to go to in Jerusalem. It's a lovely atmospheric, calm place amidst the hustle and bustle of the town around it. Of course, Jerusalem, one of the Psalms calls us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Jerusalem at times has been anything but peaceful. This is one of the gates of the old city. This is the Zion gate. And if you look closely, you can see many bullet holes from the 1948 Arab-Israeli war that took place. The British mandate over the area came to an end in May, I think it was, 1948, and there was an enormous battle between the Israelis and the Arabs. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs were displaced, thrown out of their homes, had to become refugees, and then subsequently many Jews returned to the land. And there's still, even today, all these years later, conflict, and it's so sad. Many have really suffered through that conflict on both sides. And one of the most moving places you can visit if you visit the Holy Land is a place called Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial. This is one of the statues that's in that area. Yad Vashem is really not for the faint-hearted. It's a reminder of the millions of Jewish people who were killed in the Holocaust. Such a terrible, terrible situation. And men, women and children butchered. And the terrible thing is that you'd thought that we human beings would learn the lesson, but we don't seem to. There have been atrocities both before and after. Perhaps not on that scale, but we're still doing harm to one another. We're still showing a lack of care and love, aren't we? How we need to cry out to God, ask His forgiveness, help us to work for peace. Remember, Jesus said in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Let's be peacemakers. Let's work for reconciliation. And let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for our world. God bless you. Thank you so much for listening today.